Another beautiful windy day in Albuquerque, and this is David here to show you how to install a radio into your Volvo 240. Now I'm doing this on a 93 240. I know it's got a factory amplifier. It's going to be hiding back here behind this cubby, and I need to pull out this old radio. So the first thing to do is take this clip out. There's going to be a couple Torx screws in there. I'm going to remove that radio. This radio will pull straight out. There's my code attached to it. We've got a couple of connections, wires for all the speakers, antenna, and something else. Oh, this is the antenna and the amplifier. There's 3 connectors in the back. Let's remove them all. Now you may have noticed that the opening is kind of a special shape to fit that radio. We have this kit 99-9222 from Metra. Places like Crutchfield will carry it. I got this on eBay. It's got one of these for the bottom if you have an older 240 and you want to put your radio on the bottom tray. I'm not really sure where this goes. It's kind of a weird shape. It doesn't really fit up top, but this is the one we're going to be using to fit it up top. It's a single DIN, and that one's not really big enough for a double DIN anyways. This is our wiring kit. The longer harness goes to the amplifier. This one is going to plug in right here. Now comes the fun part where we have to remove this center console here. We're going to find our amplifier, and we're going to first have to take the shifter cover off so we can get to those 2 screws. And then there's a couple of screws on the sides of this piece, and there's a lot of vacuum lines attached right here to this guy. So whatever you do, take pictures, make sure you know everything goes back, because it is a cluster you know what back there. Also a screw here and here. Pull out from the sides. There's a little bit of a lip, and this should come out a little bit. Then you can see from the top all the wire connections, and we're going to disconnect everything so we can remove that plate completely. As bad as it looks, you've got like your positive, your negative for your cigarette lighter, lights that are wired in series, the seatbelt reminder lamp, and then this connector, you just know that it goes on the far right for your air conditioning switch. Unless you have the older style, that's a little more complicated. This here is the heated mirrors, defrosting. That's the flashers. And then this is for the back defroster. And this little guy here is his own connector. So just kind of keep their relative positions in mind, and then you shouldn't have any problems putting them back together. Our next step is now removing the screws to get the metal bracket. So behind this tray is going to be our amplifier. Now that we have those big screws removed, we're going to also remove the small screws, the 4 that go in here. We can just push this whole climate unit back and slide this guy forward. You don't want to pull too hard on it before you remove those 4 small screws, because all the vacuum lines back there can disconnect, and then you'll really be in trouble. And there's our amplifier. It's tethered to the back of this cubby. There's 2 bolts that look like it's holding it in the middle, and a couple of connectors. We're going to try to figure out how our wiring is going to fit with that once we have it out. Amp, there's our back. There's 1 connector to it only. So it looks like, since this connector here only has a few wires to it, whereas our new one has a lot more wires, I can assume that this goes into the radio, and then this is the output to the amplifier, which then here's our input to the amplifier, and this is the output to the speakers. So in effect, what we're going to be doing is connecting this harness, the long one, which is like 3 feet, to the amplifier harness, which is giving us all of the green, gray, and purple wires that are for the speakers. All right. Nice thing about these wires is that they are labeled. Left speaker front, left speaker rear, right speaker front, right rear. And this here's, 12-volt battery output to the amplifier, to our aftermarket amplifier. Ground, constant, dimmer switch, etc., etc. And looks like we're not even going to use these ones over here. So those aren't even going to get used because they don't have an opposite side there on the connector. So make sure you follow the instructions on each one on how to wire it. Should be pretty straightforward. On our radio is going to have a pigtail, which these will go into the pigtail on the radio, and these will be the speakers for the radio. Cool. So I'm going to plug this in, snake this one up and behind there so that we can have it to the radio. The easier way to do that is to just snake this down so I'm not worrying about wrestling 8 or 9 wires. You don't really have to remove your stock amplifier. It's not in the way of anything, and I don't need the space for anything in specific. So I'm just going to leave it there. If anyone ever wants to revert the car, if I ever decide to sell it, then it'll be there. The way that I've wired that in is I've put in this wire. I sort of put tape loops around it so to keep it clean. I put half of it, I bent it in half like this, fed it up through here, was able to reach around the top with my other hand and grab that loop with my middle finger, make a hook, and just pulled it out. You can see that we have a lot of extra wiring. We're just going to have to tuck all this away unless you want to cut it short. I'm not going to cut it short. I don't really feel like doing that right now. That's basically all set up. Now would be a good time if you're installing an aftermarket amplifier with these connections for the back of your stereo and that little blue wire, which is your amp signal to turn on back there. Now would be a really good time for you to start feeding it through here, which is what I'm going to do in the very same fashion. Well, gosh, that looks terrible. I'll be honest with you, it's a little terrifying, but now that all of our wires are tucked away nicely, later I'm going to install this wire underneath the carpet, but for today I just want it to be up and behind the thing. So I'm going to reinstall the cubby with that metal bracket, and then we're going to be able to put back this piece as well. Now's a good time to replace any bulbs if they've burned out. And then we're going to finally put in our radio. It's an Alpine, it's Bluetooth with blue lights and a detachable faceplate. So the blue lights will be nice, they'll match the interior. And then that should fit in there using the adapter plate. LEDs for Carol, my previous Volvo station wagon, but now I can put them in here to replace those tiny little bulbs that have burned out. So I'm really excited to see how that looks. Now we have nice, fancy LEDs. Cool. Now, if you get confused about the lights on the back, which they are very easily confusing, this one and this one, both defrosters, or if you only have one, then just the one defroster, they have a power and a ground to the bulb. So this light here and the one for the air conditioning, those two do not have a ground, or they don't have a power signal on the bulb because the power signal is in the switch. So that's one good way to tell them apart. In other ways, you can just pull the switch out and look at it and then match it with a bulb that has the appropriate terminal or does not have the appropriate terminal. And the one on the end is a bigger bulb, so you won't mix that up at all for the seatbelt reminder. Pretty much takes most of our time up right there. I'm going to put the shifter back on, and then it's time to wire in the radio. So now that everything is put back together on the lower half, if you do not have a factory amplifier, this is basically where you would start, unfortunately. Fortunately for you. You would have your connector there that goes to the radio, and you wouldn't have to worry about this, and if you had an option to put an aftermarket amplifier, you'd do that there. So basically, now we have to figure out a way to mount this to that adapter plate, which goes here, and I'm very happy with the quality of it. It feels really nice, and it will use the same 2 screw holes here to attach itself. That wasn't too bad at all. There are little tabs on the cage for the radio, or the sleeve, whatever you want to call it, and you bend those up. Oh, I see where I kind of sliced my hand there. There's no car job complete without some sort of injury. And then there's 3 more tabs on the bottom. Once those are in place, it actually holds it pretty firmly. You can get creative with brackets, side tabs, utilizing the back screw. I know that the adapter kit does have an L bracket that comes with the kit to install it. I assume the smaller of the 2 holes goes here, and then you would screw it up into something or down into something. My problem is with these 240s, that's our heater core lines down there, and I don't want this resting on the heater core lines. It's already a lot of time and trouble to replace those. So maybe it won't even reach that far back, so I'm going to measure it with my measuring tape. We'll see if it can go down onto the heater core. I don't assume it would go up anywhere unless it rests on that pad, which it doesn't look like the old radio even rested on anything. it was sufficient for it to just sit there. Then again, this new one does weigh a little bit more. Well, I tried fitting it this way. It didn't want to fit. I tried fitting this reversed 180 degrees so it points up, and it didn't fit even worse. So I'm not going to use that. It doesn't seem like I really need to. But I thought I would at least satisfy my curiosity by trying it. At this point, I can help you to simplify things. We have 4 basic connections coming out of the car. Half the radio connection, and then that long amplifier bypass connection are 2 aftermarket amplifier signal wires, and then that's the antenna. That's just going to plug in straight into the new radio. That's pretty universal fit. We're going to connect this one and this one to the harness that will now go into the back of the radio, using the instructions that came with the radio and some fancy tools. And then these 2 guys are going to plug into the back of the RCA ports on the stereo here, the one that says SW subwoofer. If I had 2 subwoofers or 2 outputs or something, there's a front and a rear, but the rear is for the subwoofer. That's the antenna connection here. And REM remote, I'm not sure if that's like a wireless remote. We're not going to be using that. There is a 10 amp fuse, which is a pretty common amperage rating for stereos. If your radio doesn't work, make sure you check that first. I've already popped a couple of fuses in the car because some of these wires touched other things while I was working down here. So I was very careful not to let anything get damaged. Okay, there's our main wires. It's our power antenna, remote, turn on, illumination, ignition, battery, and ground. I've sort of taped them all together to clean them up a little bit. I had some extra on those, so I looped them a little. And now it's really straightforward. These are just the remaining wires for the speakers. And then we can put it on our radio and test it out. Right, there's the rest of them here. I'm going to tape that. Find a way to tuck everything in, plug it in. Okay, here we go, moment of truth. My antenna's broken. I don't expect to get a lot of great reception, but... Ooh, I haven't even touched it yet. All right. Yay! Let's check all of our balances. Oh geez, how does this work? I gotta learn a new radio now.
Tequila Rain on 89.1 KANW, New Mexico Music. It's 4:12. I'm Kevin Oltero with the latest from Andrew Gonzalez. Un momento allá. Qué bonito fue.
I desperately need new speakers, but I'm just really happy to have radio again. They all buzz. I got tweeters, yay!